Okay, now I'm going to, I'm not, boy, we only made it barely 1/4 on the study guide, so we're going to be moving, hopefully we'll make it to the Kofun period. We're going to start now with the Yayoi period. The Yayoi period is around 300 BC to 300 AD. It follows the Jomon period, and for another sort of reference is that it sort of overlaps the Han period in China, which of course is approximately 200 BC to 220 AD. So you've got Han China is eclipsed on both sides, or encompassed on both sides by the Yayoi. But this of course is a very different culture from the Han in China, which was very developed at the time. During this period, rice began to be grown in Japan and metals were found. It seems that both rice and metals were actually introduced from the mainland, from China, and also from through Korea. This farming revolution brought about territorial claims among different groups of people living in Japan, so we start to sort of see tribal groups developing in the different regions. And it's at this time that the Chinese records refer to different areas of Japan as being the countries of the Wa people, W-A, which refers to them actually as being the small people. During this time, we also get a concentration of people in what is known as the Yamato area. This is the Yamato Peninsula, which will also be known later on as the Nara Peninsula. And I'm sure many of you are much more familiar with the term Nara here. And this is an inset photograph of the Nara Peninsula. The term Yayoi comes from a site, in fact, just outside of Tokyo, here to the northeast. But mostly, the most concentration during this time was in this sort of general area. Rice, as I've mentioned, was introduced from the mainland, probably came from the Wu and Yue areas of East China. The introduction of rice meant a very different type of lifestyle for the Japanese. It meant that they had to abide by very carefully by wet seasons and dry seasons, but also they had to learn to use water in a very careful way, because rice is dependent on water. Therefore, the saving of water, the building of small canals, and actually moving water from rivers into the rice paddy areas was very important. So technology begins to develop at this time. Also, we see a development from the pit dwellings into a raised dwelling house. That's important as well. People are raising themselves up off the ground, which and above the ground, and this is another step in sort of in civilization developmental periods. And this is a reconstruction of a Yayoi style house. They still are circular floor plans in some instances, others are more rectangular. Here we have, again, thatched roofs, as we have seen before, but standing up much higher, although they still do appear to be hugging the ground. There's also, in many of them, there are areas for chimneys, so the smoke from cooking could escape, and this indicates that cooking often, particularly during the cold periods, would have taken place inside. Now, the ceramic ware from this time is distinctly different, as you can immediately see. The pots were wheel thrown. The wheel was introduced from Korea, and Korean craftspeople probably made their way over through sort of trade that was going backwards and forwards between the mainland and Japan. So eventually this technology did come over, and with the Yayoi we see a distinctly different type of vessel. It's it's a much more harmonious, homogeneous form of work. It no longer has the eccentric and flamboyant protrusions that we saw before. It also has a smoothness that could only be achieved actually on the wheel. The surfaces are still decorated with sticks, as you can see, stick markings here and along the rings here, but the evenness of these rings can only be achieved by the spinning of a wheel. This would not be possible without that technology. Thin necks with broader lips, which actually allow for pouring, and that's something one couldn't do with the larger Jomon pots. Also, these pots are now beginning to be glazed, and a question came up in the break as to whether the Jomon pots were painted or not. We just don't know. There's no evidence that they were painted. They might have been. It makes sort of sense if bodies were being painted, that the figurines could also have been painted. And of course we have a history of early Neolithic pots from the Yangshao period being painted in China, and early pots in India too. So there's a possibility that they may have been. These are light-bodied pots from the Yayoi, symmetrical works, very fine turning, and very sort of even, beautiful bodies to them. And yet there's that interest in the neck area. That instead of just having a very smooth top, now the continued interest, but in a much more sort of smooth, sophisticated way than the energetic earlier works. And here's some more. They're all quite similar. Once the wheel was discovered, then ceramics start to be produced almost entirely on the wheel, and there are great strides taken very quickly. These are decorated with alternating colors of sort of white and red, as you can see, together with stick markings on the body and also rings around the neck. And we do continue, though, to have some distinctive typewares, such as this pot, which has a cord-marked body and has a face on the neck of it. I mean, it's a wonderful face, and one wonders what the origin of it was, whether it was for a ritual purpose or what. It seems to have some sort of ceremonial purpose, because the shape of it, again, would not allow for too much sort of wear and tear from a practical point of view. Now, one of the most distinctive things that we find from the Yayoi period are these dotaku, or bells, as they're called. Metalware was introduced to Japan via Korea around actually the 2nd century AD. And here we have the sort of results of some of what I call truly indigenous Japanese ware, as opposed to works that, and we will see some that one can't really tell whether they're Japanese or from the mainland. These are bells that don't have a clapper, so they are struck from the out, or they would have been struck from the outside. And they probably, again, had some sort of ceremonial function. Japan missed a long Bronze Age, And this metal was introduced at a time when in China it was already, the Bronze Age had already been replaced by iron. And we find that the first metalware was bronze, and it was utilized by the sort of the elite and the upper classes, particularly for ritual wear. So Japan skipped that evolutionary stage, and she went straight into, she adopted the technology and just took off. And this is interesting because we will discover that many times in Japan's history there are periods of isolation, and when she comes out of isolation, she absorbs very quickly developments that have been occurring in the other areas of the world, and then takes off and usually overtakes the originators of technology. And, well, we can look at just what's happening right now in the, I say 20th, the 21st century, where we see how Japan took modern technology and transformed it overnight and perfected it and developed like the cars and the cameras, electronics. And this is the same type of thing that has happened with bronzes. And I could show you some more Chinese-style bronze bells, which were probably tributary gifts, but these are distinctly Japanese, with a very distinctive aesthetic pattern. An insistence on the sort of wave styles of pattern, these circular markings here. They seem to love these circles. And then we come over to this one. I love this pattern, this undulating wave pattern. And at the bottom, we have a serrated triangular pattern, which is repeated along the edge. Unfortunately, the edge has corroded and has broken off. But that wonderful sui or water pattern is a design that, again, will be repeated throughout and becomes very much a part of the conscience of aesthetics here. Another one, again, with the circular design, and the bell on the left has distinct panels in it, and this is a bell in our own collection right here, upstairs on the, it should be upstairs on the second floor. And so you can see where it plays in the sort of grand scheme of things. Now here are some more bells, and these also have panels similar to the Brundage bell, and inside the panels, some of them have actual images of animals. So for the first time now, we're having like stick images. And this is a detail, and you can see the little animal here with antlers, so it's perhaps some sort of deer or antelope. And then there is a couple of animals here with two legs. Maybe these are a form of bird, long-legged bird walking along, and these are blank up there. Cross-hatching used to border and frame the actual images. And here is another bell with, again, more panels with designs inside. And let's see, we've got a man up here who appears to be doing some sort of winnowing, or he's got some instrument in his hand. And down, let's see, he's here. And then these figures down here appear to be beating maybe rice, like mochi, making something like mochi, which is still done particularly at New Year's. The figures are stick figures, very simple, formed out of just linear elements, triangular bodies, and actually round and sort of more triangular type heads with distinctive arms and legs. So we see the actual body starting to form at this time. So this is the first time we have seen that, but we also see them engaged in agricultural pursuits and building, and there's an actual building which we can't see too clearly over here. But these are a reflection of things that were happening in their lives at this time. Well, I've got another. Oh, let's see. Well, before I go on to that, what I wanted to show you up here, this looks like a salamander up here. Some of them have fish on them, and there is also some that have turtles on it. There's a lot of reference to seafood. And this is because seafood was a very important source of protein, an important part of their diet. So the image, it's natural that the image would, or the images of fish and sea life would occur in their early art pieces. So as I say, as with the dogu, we really are not quite sure what the purpose of the bells were, but it definitely seems there was some sort of ceremonial purpose, ritual purpose, and their use may have been introduced, as I say, from the mainland. But the wonderful tall treatment, and some of them actually have convex lines, silhouettes, are very, very distinctive. So when you see a bell like this, you know where it will come from. Okay, we're now moving into the next period. This is into the Kofun period. The Kofun is the tomb period. It's, again, a term that translates to mean tomb. And it follows the Yayoi period, and from around 300 to 552 AD. And so we at least have a terminus for this period, but the beginning is somewhat hazy. However, tumuluses and tombs continue to be built through the 8th century. So there wasn't, physically, they didn't stop in 552. Something else happens then. We'll find out about that later. It's actually the introduction of Buddhism. Now, from the 3rd to the 6th century, contacts with the mainland, notably with Korea, become much more frequent and much stronger than before. Large colonies of people seem to have been moving backwards and forwards between the two countries, and we know that there seems to be evidence that Koreans emigrated to Japan and Japanese immigrated to Korea. During these 3 centuries, also, a fairly organized class system developed, and we become aware of what could be called BE, or guilds. These were guilds of craftspeople that played an important part in the development of various industries, such as the bronze industry and the ceramic industry and builders. So what we're having now is evidence of a stratification of culture. So cultural class and craft distinctions are taking place. The period, however, is called Old Tombs or Kofun period because of the number of tombs that proliferated throughout Japan at this time. Over 10,000 of them have been discovered, most of which were circular heaps of stone, but others were quite distinctive and, as we'll see, were known by the term of, well, we gave them the term keyhole shape because I'm quite sure Japan didn't have our keyholes, but we'll look at those in a minute. Before I get to that point, I do need, though, to discuss some of the sort of political developments that were taking place. During this time, we have the supremacy developing of the Yamato clan, or the Yamato state, in this area here, the Yamato Peninsula. This here is Ise, Nara is about here, and Kyoto is here. So this is when Yamato begins to exert itself as a sort of a solid power base. During this time, the tribals or the clans that were developing were building up a lot of their power bases through trade, particularly with Korea. And we have trade and evidence of trade between the Japanese and particularly with the Paekche, also known as the Kudara, and of course you know all about this from Kumja Kim's lecture. And it was an interesting development that took place between the two Korean kingdoms, the Silla and the Paekche, and their relationship with Japan, because essentially you had the three of them playing off against each other. The Silla in the southeastern area here remained almost continuously at war with Japan, desperately trying to preserve their mineral wealth from the Japanese. This area is very rich in minerals and particularly in iron ore, and Japan does not have a lot of natural resources. So this was of great interest to the Japanese in this area. The Japanese records refer to Silla's subjugation in suggestive statements that are often framed in terms of tribute of shipments of iron and copper ores being sent by the Koreans to the Japanese. But Silla's natural resources aided its own rise to an eventual domination of all Korea that was preceded by the expulsion of the Japanese troops from its area. So the Silla themselves were building up their own strength to eventually unify Korea under them. But in the meantime, they were also constantly fighting the Japanese. Now, according to Japanese records, the early records, the Japanese established a colony here at Mimana. The Koreans dispute this. It's again one of these sort of nebulous things. It does appear from the actually the archaeological records. Evidence does point to the fact that there was a very close relationship and evidence of some sort of Japanese establishment there. Whether it was large enough to be a colony or not is not known. But Mimana was tenaciously held not only as a trading center, but as a sort of political buffer between Silla and between, say, Silla and the Japanese. Now, in the meantime, because of the state of perpetual war between the Japanese and the Silla, this sort of neutral zone here, the Japanese established very strong relationships with the Paekche. They traded with them, and it was the Paekche who looked to the Japanese when they were attacked by the Silla. The Paekche asked for help from the Japanese, and in return, as we will soon learn, the Paekche sent to the Japanese Buddhist images and Buddhist priests and texts. So I'm telling you about this now, but we will pick up on that later on. But what you need to know is that this was a time when Japan was receiving a lot from Korea, but also there was it was a very tense time, particularly in the southwest area. So now looking actually at the tombs themselves. This is a barrow at Ishibutai, which is in the Yoshino Mountains between Yoshino and Nara in the Yamato Peninsula. And as you can see, these are very large boulders. These are granite stones that have been piled up on top of each other. There are many tombs like this, and they usually enclose a pit, and one can walk down into the pit, and this is the interior of Ishibutai, and so you can see how the walls have been built up, and then this is the top. We do have evidence that the interior walls in some of these tombs, in fact, were painted, and I'll show you some of the paintings at the end. So some of the tombs are very simple. They are reminiscent of the sort of the Stonehenge type of accumulations that we see in England. But what we really associate with the Kofun period are these splendid so-called keyhole-shaped tombs. This is the tomb of Suinin, who was the king who ruled around 249 to 280 AD, and this is in Nishinokyo, in just to the west of Nara city. And when you're walking along in the sort of park area, so you're just sort of walking, there's a footpath, just like the bike paths that we have in our own parks. This is what it looks like. And you wouldn't even realize that it was a tomb. There is just water, but from the aerial point of view, you can see that there is a round area, then an extended apron area that gives it this very distinctive shape. These tombs, these keyhole-shaped tombs are in the Osaka-Nara area, and most of them, well, all of them are still inviolate. They have not been opened up. We don't know what the interiors look like. And this, I think, is significant because it tells us a lot about the Japanese sense of respect for their imperial ancestors. There's a sacredness attached to these tombs, some of which were plundered in the outlying areas, but most of which have not been touched, and they certainly haven't been invaded by archaeologists either. Now this is another aerial view. This one is of Nintoku's tomb just outside of Osaka. He ruled around 395 to 427, so he was about 100 years after Suinin. As you can see again, this very distinctive shape to the tomb itself, the rounded area. This, in fact, in the round area is where the tomb is, and then we have this extension surrounded by a moat, and then foliage, and then there's actually another moat. So, and some of them did have double moats. Here are some plans of these tombs, and you can see from the plans that there is the central areas, and then the extension out into these apron-like projections that give them their name. And this is another view. These are tombs outside of Osaka, this taken from the air, and so it just gives you some sense of how many of them. They're just everywhere, which of course, as I mentioned, when you're there, one's not really aware of them, but very easy to recognize, particularly if you're flying over Osaka, when you fly into the new airport there. This is a map in which we can see the distribution of the tombs, most of which we're seeing sort of in this area here, and then fewer out into the Kyushu area, some in Shikoku. So, but mostly in this area of the Yamato Basin. Now, the Kofun period is also interesting because it has a very distinctive form of ceramic ware that was produced as well. These ceramic images are known as Hanowa. These are essentially cylinders made out of a ceramic or a basic terracotta base, which are either plain or have a head at the top, such as this face that we see here with a little open mouth. Some of them could become even more elaborate, as you see this couple, and they've even got arms, and they appear to be actually singing or even doing some sort of dance. There's some sort of suggestion of movement. Hanowa literally means ring, a circle of clay, or ring of clay, and the ring refers to the bases. They're always round at the bottom, and this is because the bases were what they stood on, and they actually were found all the way around the perimeters of the keyhole tombs. So let's go back to, I think we've got a tomb. And I will be showing you details later, but all the way around these areas here were found Hanowa, and then others were actually added onto the elevated areas on the apron and also onto the circle. So they played a very important role in the decoration or in the sort of the ritual of the tombs. Now, they tell us again a lot about the various developments of the people. Far more sophisticated approach to the figures. Also, we can see distinctive trades that each of them have. This one here is wearing some sort of dress. It's a seated one. The round cylinder is down below, wearing an elaborate hat. And it could be some sort of priest. It could be an entertainer. It has this stick-shaped triangular pattern. This is a ubiquitous pattern that constantly occurs. Here you see it again, and it's alternating black and sort of red paint on it. In fact, there's quite a bit of paint that is still remaining on several of the Hanowa figures. This figure has a stick in its hand. Maybe it's some sort of, he may be a farmer of sorts, and this is perhaps his stick, or it could be a sword. It's actually, I'm thinking about it, might even be a sword, so he's possibly a soldier. Here is another figure, and this one definitely has a sword here. He's wearing an upper robe over pants or trousers, tied at the knees, and probably wearing some sort of shoes as well. The robe has a full type of sleeve that also has a cord tie on it. So the dress appears to be developing as well. It doesn't. It's well, at least it was only rudimentarily, if at all, referred to in the earlier periods. They're wearing hats. In most instances too. This one has that ubiquitous triangular shape, and this one also appears to be singing or dancing again with their hands up, some form of entertainment. And it's been remarked that most of these Hanowa appear to be happy. They appear to be enjoying life. Life is good, or at least they are in a form of celebration. They're very endearing. I mean, these are not frightening characters. However, there is also the question of how they're made. The eyes are hollow, the mouths are hollow. And there have been various suggestions again as to their purpose. Does the hollowness allow us to sort of sense the power that is the spirit within? The power of a person is known through the eyes. Whether that's the case or not, we don't know. Also, it's been suggested the hollowness allows the entry of the kami, of the spirits, to enter into these beings. Again, it's hard to tell. It may be purely practical. In order not to explode in the kiln, there need to be holes, and this was a practical way of doing it. There are holes in the bodies as well, round holes, and usually there are holes. Well, there are holes also in the cylinder bases. Here are some more. This one is a musician playing on a zither-like instrument. At least that's what it looks like. Perhaps it's a predecessor to the koto or something like that. Again, a smile on the face, so he seems to be quite happy about it. And this one has a hat with a triangular pattern, and then it looks like bells at the end of the points. So it's like a jester's cap that he is wearing. The costume he has on is also patterned with the triangular shape that was painted with sort of red and white designs on it, and he's got some sort of sword at his waist. His face also has markings on it. Now again, that may be tattooed or it may be a form of face painting. But if this is an entertainer, maybe he is entertaining the spirit on its passage into the next world. There's also the suggestion that such beings might be forms of shaman who were performing ritual dances and acting as mediums for intercourse with the spirits of the netherworld. This one appears to be a sort of farmer. He's got a scythe that he's holding in his belt here, or that is suspended from his belt. He's got an upper robe tied at the waist that is falling over voluminous trousers that are caught and tied at the knees. And the face is rather winsome, and the hair appears to be tied in braids on either side. So again, this is another pursuit, agriculture. The farmer is being honored here at the tomb. We also have horses, animals, and this is a wonderful animal a horse that is fully harnessed with a bridle and stirrups, saddle, and it has its groom standing in front of it, very similar to some of the other Hanowa figures that we've seen, actually including the sort of painted face. And I'm comparing it to to one of the horses and grooms from Jinja Wangdi's tomb. Actually, this isn't a groom. This is an officer. You can tell that by the coat that he is wearing. But what I would point out is that this was made around 220 to 210 BC. And this is made around 400 AD. There's about 600 years between the making of these images. Japan was much later in developing its technology and its whole culture and civilization. We haven't even discussed the development of language or writing. That will come much later. At the point of Jinja Wangdi's accomplishments, Confucius had already been dead at least 300 years, and there was a strong tradition of literature, history, writing, calligraphy, and painting. So the civilizations, the cultures, were at very different levels, because the sophistication of the Han pieces, or the Jin pieces, are quite extraordinary. The naturalism of them, the fact that they are life-size images that portray distinctive individuals, and the modeling of the face is one of the great achievements of Chinese art. And the Japanese is very different. It isn't trying to be naturalistic in the same way. It doesn't have the realism of the Chinese works, but also it's at a different developmental stage as well. And here again is one of our charming little fellows. He's another farmer, and he's got, I think it's a scythe on his shoulder here. He's very happy, that wonderful face, and life is good. And I'm comparing it with one of the kneeling archers, again from Ginger Wangdi's tomb. And again, you can see why Japan was so enthralled with everything that kept coming from the mainland. Everything that came was extraordinary and was quite different from what they were producing. So images like the kneeling archer were truly awe-inspiring, but of course they didn't see such images because we've only just discovered them, 20, 25 years ago ourselves. But there were plenty of other pieces coming out of mainland China that date from this period and earlier. We have some wonderful animals, Hanowa animals, that also were being made. This is a spotted animal with these spots on it, and ears which are open, so that would allow, of course, for the firing, for the heat to escape. Very sort of winsome figures. A dog on the right. As you can see, they were painted. Perhaps the spots are reflective of the spotted deer that we do find in Japan, and of course are at Nara, the great Toji temple. Here is a horse, and here's another dog. And note the legs. They're cylinder-like legs because these were what were standing actually in the ground. We also find houses, and on the center of most of the round areas, the central areas of the tombs, were placed houses, also made out of terracotta. The houses now, as you can see, have a distinct story. Some of them are actually two-storied houses that were still with thatched roofs, as you see here. Boats were also found. Boats would be important because of all the water, the waterways, they reflect a reality. But boats also are important because they are the conveyors of the soul to the next world. So it would be appropriate to have boats in the tombs. And on the left are some more housing designs. Okay, now this is a photograph here, or a design, I should say, which shows how the Hanowa may have been placed. We've got fractured remains that are found of some of the cylinder type here. Then we get the standing figures, and actually right on the top we get animals, and to the center are the housing style. This is like an X-ray photograph actually of one of the keyhole tombs, and along here, that dotted line, these are cylinder Hanowa that go all the way around, and then there's more Hanowa and more piled up in the very center. And this is actually a photograph of some of the broken cylinder bases of Hanowa. Now, it's been said that they were placed around the perimeters of the tomb to hold the earth so that the earth wouldn't subside and get washed down. That may have been a functional aspect of them, but they probably weren't strong enough to really hold the mass of earth and stone that were piled up. They may have contributed, though, to that sort of function. Other suggestions have been that possibly they formed some sort of magical fence, a spiritual fence that divided the sacred from the secular, divided the world of the sacred area where the deceased was passing into the netherworld from the profane world outside. And that may be, oops, I'm losing my, I don't know. Oh. Okay, sorry to do this to you. But most of these have holes in them, and they actually have holes along here. And it's thought that a rope, a shimenawa, could be actually passed through the holes, and so actually constructing a sort of psychological and physical fence between the outer and the inner areas. And the Shimenawa, these wonderful ropes, will continue to mark off sacred areas into temples and into Shinto shrines. So perhaps there is that ritual function to these figures as well. Just very briefly, some of the tombs they are actually tombs as you see here. Look at the design on the carved onto the stone. Broken arcs and diagonal lines. This is just this type of a pattern that I drew your attention to in the early Jomon period, dating back to around 10,000 BC. That intersection of the curved and the straight. This is the interior also of a tomb in Kyushu, on the island near Fukuoka, in which again we see that design of the curved line and the intersecting straight line. These are patterns that have been associated with memorials and funerary practices. These are mirrors. Mirrors also came from the mainland. They were brought as tributary gifts, or it appears to have been to begin with, before they started making them themselves. But now a mirror like this has a sort of a dragon style, comes right out of the Chinese Han style mirrors. Then we see mirrors like this, and here you can see the intersecting curved and straight lines, that chokomon design, which I've shown you on the tombs, which seems to be associated, as I say, somehow with the tombs, but here also on the mirrors. And I'm just going to quickly show you some more mirrors. This is a close-up of the mirror, which has this strange worm-like design. Sometimes it's been called a dragon, but I think it looks more perhaps like a silkworm than a dragon. Strange design. And then over here we get houses that reflect the style of architecture that we've seen evolving from the Jomon period, with the thatched roofs. I think this is a close-up of this one just here on the side. But these are thatched roofs houses, timbered structures that were being used both for living quarters and also for granaries. And how are we doing? Just here some more mirrors. I'll talk more about mirrors later on. Also found in the tombs were jade and jasper pieces, magatamas, and I don't have to tell you where the reference for these are. I mean, it comes right from Korea. These sort of silkworm-shaped, comma-shaped stones, which would have been brought over as gifts, gold pieces such as this, these beautiful sort of sequined shaped pieces that, of course, are so familiar to us from the Korean works. And then finally, some of the tombs have paintings on them. These are some of the tombs from Fukuoka in Kyushu, and you can see strange images being made with eyes, but you've got that triangular pattern. And finally, always rushing at the end, we have this wonderful tomb in Kyushu where you have painted on the wall this extraordinary design of a man, two horses, waves, a boat, and these wonderful sort of fan-shaped leaves. Okay, I will pick up on this next time, and we will talk about Shinto art next time.